Fishing news is sponsored by these fine partners.
Gannets wheeling and diving, a common sight up and down the Jersey coast in recent weeks. This was video taken on Monday morning just outside of Manasquan Inlet. The guess is that they're diving on herring, but I don't know for sure. The question, of course, didn't you see anybody fishing it? Weren't there any guys out on the jetty, any boats out? Someone casting? Well, it was colder than a well digger's buttocks on Monday. 20 degrees, 40-knot winds from the northwest. You could only look to the east as turning westward into the wind felt like a slap across the face. Jim Hutchinson with a New Jersey Delaware Bay edition of the Fisherman magazine. A blustery start to this week, and I'm still trying to shake that bone-numbing cold as we get ready to greet the 1st of April 2022. It sure looks like that varmint fill was right after all. Just as we thought we were out, Mother Nature pulled us back into winter. But as of Thursday, March 31st, we present this week's fishing forecast, and the weather turns for the better. We've actually got some nice weather coming up for the next couple of days. Some rain in the forecast on Thursday, but a lot warmer. Also some rain in the forecast perhaps for Sunday. But all in all, a little spring is in our step for this weekend ahead. Couldn't come at a better time. I did get a few active reports through the past weekend. For the full rundown, make sure you pick up the April edition of the Fisherman magazine. It's out on newsstands, in tackle shops. It'll be in this tackle shop. I'm at Fisherman's Den in Belmar. Later on this week, and of course you subscribers, you'll have that delivered in time for the weekend, I hope. North, Central, South Jersey reports. Of course, we've got our full freshwater rundown. We've got a Delaware report, and we've also got our surf report. Again, look for the April edition of the Fisherman magazine, and you've got all the reports in there from throughout the region. New Jersey, a little bit of Pennsylvania, and a little bit of Delaware as well. Before we break down this week's action, or at least the action of late, let's kick off this week's video forecast with something that we talked about last week. That's the big news related to black sea bass and summer flounder fluke in the Garden State. It's a story that I've tried to stay on top of in the last few weeks. And on page 60 of that April edition, you'll find a brief write-up of where we stand. But here is where we are at this point on Thursday, March 31st. Because if you watched last week's video forecast or the last couple of weeks, I shared with you some of the big list of options that was being reviewed by the ASMFC, the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. They met last Thursday, March 24th. Well, the volunteer advisors to the New Jersey Marine Fisheries Council, well, they met on Tuesday night to talk about black sea bass, okay? And they were able to whittle down to a few black sea bass options for 2022 that make sense. I'm guessing this is what anglers and recreational fishing industry folks will be looking at when the New Jersey Marine Fisheries Council meets again next Thursday, April 7th, to talk about these regulations. What we currently have through 2021 in terms of black sea bass is a 186-day season to fish for black sea bass. So that 20% or so cutback required by NOAA Fisheries will obviously be able to force a drop in the fishing days and or adjustments to the size and bag. It's my understanding that so-called options 4, 9, and 15 were put forth by the advisors as the best of the worst possible scenarios. This is what we should be looking at in terms of black sea bass when the council meets on April 7th. Now, in terms of fluke, what I call the straw that stirs the drink here in the Garden State, when it comes to recreational fishing, advisors were set to look at 19 or so different options this week in a meeting held on Wednesday, March 30th. Now, I'm going to take a stab at guessing on what we might be looking at in April 7th when the council meets virtually. All right, so here we go. Last season, we had 3 fish at 18 inches, a season from May 22nd to September 19th, a total of 121 days. Because we're allowed to loosen things up a little bit, 15% or so, keeping the same size and bag would allow New Jersey to fish a total of 154 days, starting the fluke season a little earlier and ending a tad later. Or we could lower the size limit to 17.5 inches and retain that 3-fish bag limit. In that case, we'd still be able to increase the length of the season by about 5 days, potentially starting the season on May 21st and carrying it out to September 23rd. Now, thanks to the hard-working folks at the New Jersey Division of Fish and Wildlife, they've been doing a little bit of statistical number crunching. They're also looking at a couple of slot options that could also be presented next Thursday, April 7th. Now, just looking at the ones that don't lead to fewer than 121 days of fishing, as we have now, or in 2021, there's a two fish at 17.99 inches. That's two in that slot. And then you'd get one at 18 inches or above. That season would run from May 2nd to September 27th, as an example, a 149-day season. You have a secondary set of slot options. Two fish between 16.5 and 17.99 inches. And then that one over at 18 inches. We do something like that. We run May 27th to October 2nd, something in there about 128, 129 days. So that's four potential options I see us having next Thursday. This is just my Groundhog Day forecast at this point. Not sure which option will be preferred by the advisors. Not sure which will be presented by the council. But this is basically what we're looking at on April 7th here in the Garden State. I'd encourage you, those of you who have an opinion, a strong belief about what fluke and sea bass should be, to make sure you attend that meeting webinar next Thursday, April 7th. Just Google New Jersey Marine Fisheries Council and go to the meeting schedule. You get all the details, register for that meeting. I'll have official word on summer flounder, sea bass, and porgies too a week from today, but you'll get that. Just check on the Fisherman's Facebook page for breaking news next Thursday night when we get these things finalized. Now, I mentioned being here at the Fisherman's Den in Belmar this week, where Bobby said the winter flounder bite, not talking summer flounder anymore, but those blackbacks, it has been a little bit slow so far this season. And of course, with this colder weather this week, I would expect that's typically something that happens as well. But we do expect some better reports in the next couple of days, I hope, from areas of Shark River, L Street Pier, some folks to get in the rental boats and moving around the river a little bit. One thing that Bobby said is just about the time that the first reports of summer flounder come into Shark River, sometime in April. That's a lot of times when the winter flounder starts snapping as well. But hopefully Shark River will turn on a little bit in terms of that. But stopping into Fisherman's Den, great idea. I'll tell you what, folks have been talking for weeks about the bait holder style circle hooks. Bobby was just showing me some of the rigs that he's made up using the circle hook, the bait holder style, using the eagle claw. He's got them all rigged up here. And of course, April 1st, this weekend, we're kicking back off into the blackfish season. So you can stop by here at any of your local tackle shops who gear up for the tog action, maybe pick up some slider rigs or snafu rigs. Now is certainly the time as we shake out with that. Back to the bait. We talked about herring. Last week we talked about bunker in the mix. So hopefully you're gearing up for the run. I heard from Nino Aversa this week. He told me that the El Nino crew, which is Rob Redrow, Joey King, they did a number on the striped bass this past Saturday up on the Raritan Bay. They were using the new Nomad Vertrex Max Vibe bunker, those little casting shads. Also, slow-trolled Tony Maja 3-ounce casting mojos. Hint, hint. So while the pluggers are gathering along the shores of the Raritan Bay with the kayakers and the charter boat fleet in search of big catch and release striped bass, the spawning class have definitely made it to the Delaware River at this point. No surprise, right? Schoolies, if you've heard that they're just schoolies, that's completely ridiculous. Good fish are being warmed up and released from various areas along the Delaware River at this point. In the Palmyra area, Adam Robinson shared this image with me this week. Not a schoolie. This past Saturday morning, Brandon Overstreet shared this photo of Aiden Overstreet with a 43-incher from somewhere along the New Jersey western shore. Couple of quick pics, back at it, healthy and strong. Not a schoolie. And Rod Taylor showed off this spawner, also not a schoolie. It was bloodwormed along the Delaware someplace this past Friday. Love this photo, by the way. Left hand on the lip, the hard cartilage, right hand underneath the belly. Perfect way to hold a striped bass, especially those fish we're getting early this part of the season when they're staging before the spawn. Big sagging bellies. Lock that in. Textbook. Thank you so much. Perfect. Action in the rivers and back bays, of course, throughout the Garden State and down along the Delaware Bayshore is going on. Carl Vogelzang, he let me know that he had good luck around Good Luck Point over the weekend. Had a couple of short stripers on bloodworms. We've been talking about that potential for winter flounder along that stretch. I've also heard from a few guys throwing soft plastics and gliders at night. Some fish around the inlets in New Jersey, talking to Bobby before. While I'm a wuss, I'm not going out in that heavy wind and cold. Some of the young guns are out there getting it done, throwing some of the swim shads. You might also think we talked about the Rapala X-Raps for a while, but guys are starting to plug up some fish along the Raritan Bay as well. I know if the Sharpies have gone dark, especially those guys that I know in Atlantic and Cape May County, if I haven't heard from one of them in a few days, I know there must be something up in those rivers as well. Al DiMartino Jr. let me know that there's some light tackle action to be had along the Hackensack, around Secaucus, and certainly worth floating a bloodworm, soaking a bloodworm someplace along the rails there in Jersey City or Bayonne as well, as folks get out and about looking for some of those fish. So yes, certainly those hot spots, you know them well. Along the Raritan Bayshore, some places in the Toms River. Think along the Mullica where the Great Egg meets, or where Great Bay meets. The Great Egg, of course, and we're also getting those reports down along Fortescue Beach, along the Delaware Bayshore as well. And of course, those fish are heading up to spawn along the Delaware. Don't forget, TOG action gets underway again here in the Garden State this week, April 1st, opening day. And there's no change in regulations, of course. We're talking sea bass, we're talking porgies, we're talking fluke, but everything is status quo on TOG this year. April 1st kicks it off. I know this fleet here, driving through the parking lot here in Belmar this week, a lot of guys working on the boat, gearing up. It's going to be there, it's just balls to the wall at this point, heading back offshore to get some of those hungry TOG into the mix. Great trout advice I've got coming up from a good friend of mine who's also under Shad Watch 2022. George, what's happening out in Pennsylvania?
Well, hey, thanks, Jim. You know, fishing is starting to pick up, even though this weather has certainly thrown us for a loop. Temps are more like early February than the end of March, beginning of April. But right now, we're going to kick things off on the Shad Watch. I know we talked about that a little bit last week, and I tied in with a few folks to get a feel for what's happening in the river. Now, I tied in with Tim Keebler over at Fin Seeker Guide Service there on the Delaware, and he said the river was full of fish. He was fighting tough conditions, but he managed to consistently net fish throughout the day. But he said the river is full. There's lots of shad to go around. They just got a slight case of lockjaw right now until this weather warms up. Also, John Augustine over at Hardcore Shad Spoons, he sent a few pictures of guys, Joe Fromovich and Eric Schulenberg. They were out catching some shad too on those spoons and being pretty successful despite those tough conditions. So things are looking good for shad. Just keep on them. I mean, keep in mind, guys, it's still the end of March here, so we got a long way to go till we hit the peak sometime in May. So good fishing there. Now, as I promised last week, I got some great tips with the opening of trout season this Saturday, April 2nd, here in Pennsylvania. I reached out to the folks at Trout Unlimited here in Broadheadsville. Eric Goodstall, one of the directors, sat down and gave me a few tips for you guys that wanted to get on some trout opening day. Now, Eric said for the fly fishermen, keep an eye out on the hatches as bugs are going to be popping off. Caddis and blackstones are already hatching, but keep an eye out for the first big mayfly hatches of the year. Hendrickson and Quill Gordons will be starting in the weeks to come. He says for the spin guys, this is spinner season. Overcast days, use gold and silver spinners and take advantage of slightly higher flows as long as it's not too muddy. Jerk baits and salted minnows can be a real ticket for larger trout as well. Don't be afraid of small marabou jigs on 4-pound mono with a long spinning rod. It's just like a Euro nymph on a fly rod, but spinning gear. Very effective in riffled pockets or runs. Use a 1/32 marabou jig or a 1/16. Use natural colors for brown trout and flash your neon colors for a rainbow trout. Now, this is good advice, guys. You know, if you're new to fishing, some good tips there from Eric, but you can't beat some of the live bait choices as well, and even some of that power bait, which is kind of ubiquitous on the opening of trout season. I hope these tips help, guys. Be sure you get out and get on this weekend. From Pennsylvania, I'm George, your Pocono Outdoors guy.
Great advice right there from George that you can put into play here in New Jersey next Saturday, April 9th. That's the start of the New Jersey trout season here in the Garden State. A big trout event here at the Jersey Shore, not far from where I am here in Fisherman's Den, is going to be that big tournament from the Shark River Surf Anglers, the 20th annual kids fishing tournament on the Spring Lake. Yeah, it's a heck of an event. Even if you don't have kids, it is just fantastic. You're not allowed to fish it, but it is fantastic for the kids because the kids just have a blast with catching all these fresh stocked trout that are in that spring lake next Saturday, April 9th. I know I'm going to be there checking it out, but I'll tell you one thing that you could do if you want to watch. They're going to stock another 500 trout this Saturday, the 2nd, out there at Shark River, or at Spring Lake. Keep saying Shark River because that's where the Shark River Surf Anglers are doing it. Spring Lake this Saturday. Go check it out because I understand there's some jumbos in the mix as well. But don't forget, you're going to need to get your license, your registration, your trout stamp for that opening day. You can do that online by going to njfishandwildlife.com. Like I said, you pay online, you print it out yourself. You don't even have to go to any of the tackle shops at this point to bother them, but you can do this from the comfort of your own office. And of course, don't forget to get your saltwater registry as well, saltwaterregistry.nj.gov, if you plan on fishing in the salt waters. Pennsylvania, we talked about that. It opens up this weekend. You can go to fishandboat.com to get your license for Pennsylvania. Delaware is up and running with their trout. And of course, you need the saltwater license down there as well. You can look up the DNREC website for all the details on that. If you want a complete listing of all the licenses and registrations all along the coast from Maine to Maryland, go to thefisherman.com, do a search of 2022 fishing licenses and registrations. We have them all in one place, so you can do all of your registration, become a legal eagle right there. The website will also showcase some of the latest stories that are in that April edition of the Fisherman magazine that's out this week. Of course, you'll get it at newsstands. I'm here at Fisherman's Den, and I know they've still got the March edition, but I imagine by the end of the weekend, you're going to be able to pick up that copy here and every other tackle shop. Folks, it's open for business at this point. The ports are busy. Everybody's getting ready for tog. Striped bass are biting. Spring has sprung, even if the winter weather was still with us this week. But if you want all the news, the fishy news that's fit to print, pick up that Fisherman magazine, and also check us out at thefisherman.com. I'm going to make a bold prediction this week for next week's video forecast. I predict that I will have next week the first confirmed 50-pound striped bass to report here next week. Lock it in. We'll see if I'm right. Not a schoolie, a spawner. I'll see you again next week right here at thefisherman.com.
Steigercraft boats, built by people who fish our waters. Serious anglers choose Steigercraft for their 40 years of boat building experience right here in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic. Visit steigercraft.com for a dealer near you.